Hello, my name is Sean Peranuzzi, and today I will be presenting my penetration test report that I conducted on Techshield. In this report, we will be going into the intro to penetration testing, methodology used, key findings and vulnerabilities, deep dive into critical and high-risk vulnerabilities that were found while conducting this test, forensic analysis, recommendations, remediations, and finally a conclusion. We conducted this test on Techshield to provide valuable and insightful information into misconfigurations, outdated services or software, as well as vulnerabilities that can be used against them and exploited by a threat actor. Our test was broken up into multiple phases. Phase 1 was reconnaissance. Our main goal here was to map out the local network, as well as discover open ports and services running on those ports. Phase 2 was vulnerability scanning. This is where we used information we recovered from the reconnaissance phase and plugged it into a tool called Greenbone by OpenVOS, which allowed us to check against its database to see if any of these IPs had any misconfigurations, outdated services, or vulnerabilities. Phase 3 was exploitation. This is where we manually exploited any of the vulnerabilities found in the previous step with a tool called Metasploit. Metasploit was used for services or system vulnerabilities, and DVWA was used to target common vulnerabilities a threat actor might attack on web applications. Phase 4 was password cracking. Any passwords we were able to receive from the previous exploits, we used a tool, John the Ripper, to try to crack those passwords and print them out in plain text. And finally, we did forensic analysis. This is where we used a tool, Autopsy, and we were able to find or recover digital evidence from the partition image. Phase 1. The first tool we used was a tool called NetDiscover. This was a tool that we could easily plug into the Linux command line and prompt it to discover the full local network of Techshield. As you see below, it gave us all the IPs on this network as well as their MAC addresses. This information was then used in further attacks. The second tool we used was Nmap. This allowed us to take a deep dive into each of the IPs that we had recovered from the reconnaissance phase to look for open ports and services on those ports. The first scan we have here of the target IP above shows us off the bat that there is a potential for an outdated or end-of-life service running on this system's SMB server, which is port 445. The concern here is that end-of-life services mean that they are no longer receiving the necessary patches or security updates, and they are an easy target for a threat actor to exploit. The second scan we have here of this target IP address shows us a lot of open ports. That isn't necessarily a bad thing if cybersecurity professionals are safeguarding them and making sure only authorized users are able to access them. The one that concerns me the most is Telnet. This Telnet is a legacy service that is known to be insecure and unencrypted. This means that a threat actor could potentially sniff out packets or intercept traffic, and the traffic would be in plain text, which could contain very sensitive information. If a threat actor were able to do this, damages could be very good, very great. Phase 2 is vulnerability scanning. In this phase, we used a tool called Greenbone by OpenVOS. It is a common tool used by cybersecurity professionals as it allows you to scan IP addresses against its database to find misconfigurations and known vulnerabilities. This is an overview of both IP addresses we attacked. This isn't a full list for either of the IPs that we scanned against, but this is the most critical rated vulnerabilities out of both. So for our scan on this target IP address, we do find that there is an end-of-life detection as well as multiple vulnerabilities on their SMB server. These two vulnerabilities in conjunction are commonly associated with a dangerous exploit known as Eternal Blue. With the right tools and know-how, a threat actor could potentially craft a packet that attacks this server and allows them to gain full control over the system. For our second Greenbone scan of this IP address, we see many critical vulnerabilities, although the one I believe is the most critical is one that was called VNC brute force login. I consider this to be critical because of the fact that it was so easy to exploit. It is a remote desktop protocol service where if a threat actor were able to exploit this and find the weak credentials, they would be able to get into the system, download malware, exfiltrate important information, or gain persistence on a system. The Greenbone scan, when it scanned it, had to use its brute force capability to find that the password was simply set to password. So that is very dangerous in the wrong hands. Our key findings and vulnerabilities. The first one that we found was the eternal blue vulnerability on Windows system with the IP addresses here. This is a critical exploit that allowed remote code execution, and it was able to be exploitable because the target system was unpatched and vulnerable. The second one that we found was the weak VNC credentials. It was exposed with insecure authentication and had weak credentials. Phase 3 was exploitation and testing. In this phase, we used a tool called Metasploit. This is another common tool used by cybersecurity professionals. It has an extensive database with CVE, common vulnerabilities and exposures, and also has a payload generator that allows a cybersecurity professional to craft a payload to target a vulnerability to an attempt to exploit that vulnerability. So our first deep dive here, which this IP address is the one that we targeted, this one did confirm that there was a known exploit. There was a known vulnerability that was exploitable. In conjunction with the Nmap scan and Greenbone scan, we did a further scan with Nmap using a script that targeted the Eternal Blue vulnerability, which did confirm that it was susceptible to this attack. To exploit this vulnerability, we used the tool Metasploit, where we were able to craft a packet with the exploit module to specifically target the SMB server of this system, which we were able to do with success and gained an interpreter session that allowed us full control over the system. For the second deep dive, we go into the second IP address that we targeted. This one was the VNC brute force login. In the top right, you can see that when the Greenbone scan conducted its brute force, it was able to find that the password was password. Had this been a threat actor that took advantage of this, they would be able to do exactly what we did, which was go into the system and gain a remote desktop that we can interact with, go into the system, potentially find sensitive information and files, exfiltrate them, or gain privileged access. Phase 4 was web application testing. For this phase, we used the tool DVWA, which is a common tool used by cybersecurity professionals to test against common vulnerabilities associated with web applications, such as command injection, file inclusion, SQL injection, and upload injection. We focused, the first one was the SQL injection. I did this first because I believe this is a common attack vector for threat actors, as SQL is a database, backend database for most web applications, and it stores a lot of sensitive information that is very valuable to a threat actor. With this simple prompt over here, we were able to gather this information, which is usernames and hashed passwords. With the passwords that we received from the previous vulnerability, we were able to use a tool called John the Ripper, which we were able to crack those passwords. John the Ripper has many use cases, but for us, we used the format on John the Ripper that allowed us to choose the hash to use to crack these passwords against its database. As you can see down here, it was able to print those passwords out in plain text, and we were able to save them. I then focused on upload injection using MSF Venom, which is the payload generator of Metasploit. We were able to craft a packet that we were able to upload to the upload injection on DVWA, where it allowed us to gain a session where we could see the root directory of that web application. Finally, digital forensics. For this phase, we used the tool Autopsy. This was used to recover hidden and deleted data from the partition image file that we investigated during this. The process was very simple. Once we found the image on our desktop that we were investigating, we simply went into our command line, typed in autopsy, and we were able to get a local URL that we were to put in our browser. Once that was input into our browser, we were able to use a GUI version of autopsy to start a file, create a case, add a host, add the forensic image path, and start the analysis. There were other settings involved in this process, such as calculating the hash to verify the image's integrity and keyword search. To export evidence files, we were able to go through with the GUI on autopsy to cycle through different directories and different files. Some of the files were openly viewable in this GUI version of autopsy, where we were able to export them and download to our system. Others were wrapped or zipped up. For the files that were zipped, we had to run simple prompts in our command line once exported into our command line system, and we were able to unzip them and retrieve the information. For the files that were wrapped in a .dac or .dat format, we were able to download a tool called Foremost, where we were able to call those file names and send an output file directory to download those images. These are all the images that we collected during our forensic analysis of this image. And now to Techshield's strengths. What I believe to be strengths of Techshield was DVWA by default was set too high. A lot of the exploits that I used to gather information from DVWA were only able to be done on low security setting. So I believe that I would not have been able to recover as much information that I had this been set to high from the beginning. Active firewall protection, I believe, is another strong point for Techshield's company. We were acting as insider threats during this penetration test. Had there been a firewall to block our access, I don't believe we would have been able to get as far as we did. The last strength, I believe, is the printer share seems to be secure. There wasn't many open ports. There was only the one for the share itself, and it didn't seem to be misconfigured in any way. Recommendations for Techshield. The short-term recommendations are to address the OS end-of-life detection as well as the Microsoft SMB server vulnerabilities. Any system that is outdated or unsupported, I believe, should be removed from the network, whether that be isolation or planning on phasing them out completely. I also believe that enforcing strong password policies is a very strong addition, and to install any patches that are available. Long-term recommendations, I believe, are to eliminate legacy systems and insecure services, establishing network segmentation and access controls, as well as reducing dependency on risky or outdated protocols. Thank you for your time. Enjoy.